What's up guys, in this video I'm going to be reviewing the Leatherman Knifeless Rebar. So the Knifeless Rebar was made for environments as well as job sites that don't allow for knife blades but still allow you to carry full-size multi-tools like the Leatherman Rebar. I put the word knifeless in air quotes because of the fact that the Knifeless Rebar still utilizes a certain tool, and depending on who you ask or where you're at and the legality, it doesn't count as a knife, but for all intents and purposes is still very much a cutting tool that I'm sure a lot of people would consider similar, if not basically the same as a knife. I've done a full review on the standard Leatherman Rebar, so be sure to check out that video if you haven't already. In terms of the overall core design of the Rebar, I like to say that the Rebar has the same core design as the original PST or Pocket Survival Tool, but it has some modern touches. It's still relatively compact and folds up into a nice form factor. It's nice and slim. It's only slightly bigger than the original PST. All of the tools require you to open up the pliers and access them from the inside, but in terms of modern touches, the Rebar does feature replaceable hard wire cutters as well as curved handles, as well as all locking tools, whereas the PST doesn't. I'll flash up the specs of the Knifeless Rebar on screen right now, and of course I'm going to do the size comparison up against some other popular Leatherman tools, as well as some other popular multi-tools like medium and small Victorinox Swiss Army knives. I put the Knifeless Rebar right next to the standard Rebar. Other than the colorway, of course, they're basically the exact same when it comes to specs and dimensions. And in contrast to the other multi-tools on the table, as I said, the Rebar is definitely on the more compact size when it comes to full-size tools. It's a lot bigger than the Victorinox Classic SD, but is smaller than the Charge and Wave and the Free series, and is a lot more smaller than the Surge, and is even on par with the Skeletal, which was intentionally made to be a very lightweight and compact Leatherman tool. And here's a little open pliers comparison. As you can see, the Rebar is still on the smaller side in contrast to the other Leatherman tools. In terms of carrying options, the Knifeless Rebar does not come with a pocket clip similar to the original PST. However, on the inside of the Knifeless Rebar, just like its standard counterpart, it does include a foldable lanyard hole, which is a nice option. It folds out like that, and in addition to the lanyard hole or just simply throwing the Rebar to the bottom of your pocket, it does come with the standard nylon Leatherman sheath. These sheaths are made in China, but they are really sturdy and pretty durable from what I can tell, and the Rebar fits nicely inside of the button closed sheath, and it also has a belt loop on the back, so that is another included option. The Knifeless Rebar features stainless steel handles, and on the outside you have both an inches and centimeters side ruler. To utilize the ruler, you gotta open up the tool like this and kind of lay the handles so it kind of makes a T with the plier head, and then boom, you have your ruler. On one side, as I said, is the inches ruler and goes up to 8 inches, and then on the other side you have a centimeter ruler which goes up to 20 centimeters. All the tools are accessible on the inside of the tool, and we'll start off with the most essential tool for pretty much all Leatherman tools, and that is the full-size pliers. The Knifeless Rebar features both regular and noodle nose pliers, as well as replaceable regular and hard wire cutters, and at the bottom of the plier head you do have a wire crimper. I briefly mentioned earlier that the handles do have a slight curve to them on the inside, so there are minimal hot spots when gripping and using the pliers. Once the pliers are open, you access the tools like this. You pull out whatever tool you want and then fully engage it until you hear a click. That noise shows you that the tool is locked and engaged, and to fully utilize the tools you simply close back the pliers and then you use the tools like this in this configuration. First up is a file. On one side you have a crisp cut file, on the other side you have a simple diagonal file, and then you also have an edge file. When you're done using a tool, you open up the tool again and then push on this low lever to unlock the tool. Then you can slide whatever tool you opened and close them back into the handles. Behind the file is the combination tool found on most Leatherman tools. This is a combination can opener, bottle opener, as well as a wire stripper. As I said, this tool is found on pretty much all Leatherman multi-tools except for like the Free series and the keychain tools. And behind that combination tool is a 3D Phillips head driver. In terms of the size, it's basically a number 1/number 2 Phillips head driver. The only other tool on this side is that lanyard hole I showed earlier. Moving on towards the other side, first up we have a full-size awl. It's a pretty great size. For those of you who don't know, awls are great for manually drilling holes, as well as with the sewing eye you can loop string or thread and poke them through holes. And next up is a tool that's actually not found on the original Leatherman rebar, and that's a set of spring action scissors. I say this all the time on all multi-tool reviews, but scissors are my most utilized tool on any multi-tool. They're just one of the greatest tools ever made. They're very nice and convenient and can do some things in a safer way that a standard knife blade can't. And it's nice to see a solid set of spring action scissors make their way onto the knifeless version of the rebar. And next up are two flathead drivers. You got a small as well as a standard size flathead driver. The standard size flathead driver can also work as a nice pry tool. And last but definitely not least, on the Leatherman Knifeless rebar is a saw. The saw, of course, is great for cutting through fibrous materials as well as wood and plastic. The inclusion of the saw is the reason why I use air quotes whenever I call it the knifeless rebar. I personally was very confused when I heard that Leatherman had a knifeless version of the rebar and yet it still included a saw. I was confused on how it counted as knifeless when you still have a full-sized cutting tool that is razor sharp. When I first heard about the knifeless rebar, I was really curious on what it was used for, because obviously with the saw it isn't going to be TSA legal. Not that Leatherman advertised it as TSA friendly, to their credit, but I was still surprised to see that their full-size knifeless edition of one of their multi-tools wasn't TSA friendly. And as I said at the beginning of the video, it's actually described as a tool made for environments and job sites that don't allow for knife blades. I guess whatever definition of a knife blade those environments and work sites mean doesn't include a saw. And don't get me wrong, if you're allowed to carry this tool in your environment that doesn't allow knife blades but still allows for saws, I'm happy for you. I'm glad you're allowed to have a full-size Leatherman tool in your workplace or environment. But I just think that it's kind of funny that a saw technically doesn't count as a knife. And then I asked around online on some forums because, of course, for the most part, this tool was made for those in Europe or really any other country that isn't the US, and I was like, without getting too graphic, pretty sure you could still do really bad damage with the saw just because it's a different style of blade. And then someone did have a genuine reply and said that the saw, the tip is relatively blunt, so again, without getting graphic, you can't penetrate things, but you can still very much cut things with ease. I think that's still kind of an interesting definition, the fact that just because you can't penetrate things effectively means that it's no longer a deadly weapon, or at least isn't as effective as a regular knife blade. I don't know, I just think it's kind of funny. I'm not hating the players, I'm not hating that this exists. I know there's been a lot of controversy with Victorinox lately about them making Swiss Army knives minus the knives. I'm not mad at them for that. Of course, without getting too political, it's just based on the rules and regulations in certain areas, and they're simply just trying to adapt and allowing their customers to still carry their tools without getting in trouble, which I think is cool. I know this little rant is kind of wrong and a little pointless. I just think it's funny that the supposed knifeless multi-tool still has a saw that, again, without getting too graphic, can still very much be considered a weapon in most places. But regardless, of course, I'm glad if you're able to carry this in your heavily regulated environment. I'm happy that you're able to. With that rant out of the way, I do think the knifeless rebar is a rock-solid tool if you are, in fact, allowed to carry it in an environment that doesn't allow for standard knife blades, whatever that means. I think the tool set is excellent, and especially with the addition of scissors, I feel like that is definitely a welcome addition, especially for a tool that lacks a traditional knife blade. Scissors can come in very handy, and they are pretty much universally welcomed, even in the most restrictive of environments. The rebar's design definitely has its pros and cons. The biggest cons are the fact that the tools require you to open up the tool and pull everything out with utilizing two hands, but in turn turn, folds up into a nice compact form factor. It doesn't have a pocket clip, but because it's mostly compact, it can fit nicely at the bottom of your pocket, and of course you also have the option of the sheath. I think the Knifeless rebar is definitely a solid tool for those more restrictive environments. Overall, the Leatherman Knifeless rebar is a pretty solid tool for those of you who are in more restrictive environments. Do you guys think it's also strange that a knifeless multi-tool still has a saw? What do you guys think of the overall package of the Knifeless rebar? I'd definitely like to know down in the comments.